Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I'm Kevin Gosztola.
And I'm Rania Khalek, and we're finally getting it right. This is like our third try.
This is the 20th take. We're getting it. And it's the first video that we're doing with the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, something that we probably could do more for patrons in the future. But for right now, we're just seeing how this all works. And we thought it's a great opportunity to do it around the Las Vegas Democratic presidential debate. And whoa, what a debate. I mean, I watched it live. You caught up because you're in Lebanon later watching it. But I mean, what's your first thoughts?
Well, I was really excited to watch because I wanted to see Bloomberg and Sanders go head to head. But sadly, I set my alarm for 4 a.m. when it started my time. And I opened my eyes and I was like, nope, not going to happen. And I went back to sleep. So I woke up this morning and watched it. And it was like really, really entertaining. I've been getting really bored with the debates because it's just the same people saying things over and over again. But it was really fun to watch everyone pounce on a billionaire. It was super fun. And it was fun to see Bernie Sanders and Bloomberg go at it. It was also just fun to watch everyone trash Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, it's like he's not human. He just had nothing he did felt human. It's like he was trying to mimic human emotions, but he was having a really hard time doing it. You know what I mean? I think that's probably just what happens when you're a billionaire. You have no charisma because you don't know how to act normal. But he did a really, really bad job defending himself. It seemed super inauthentic. And I mean, I don't know how much we can talk a little bit more later about, Bloomberg presenting a danger, because I think he still is dangerous in this race and still is competitive. And one debate's not going to change that. But it definitely showed it's kind of like they threw another person at Sanders and it didn't work,
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll put on our screen here that he's basically spent $500 million plus to be on TV, and he just there's no way you could believe the electability argument that had been put out there around Bloomberg after this debate. I just don't believe that you could, with a straight face, make the argument that that's the person who can go up against Donald Trump.
No, Trump would absolutely wipe the floor with that guy. He was so weak and pathetic and uncharismatic. And even when he tried to the one thing he tried to apologize for, which was stop and frisk, you could tell he didn't mean it. Right. There's nothing authentic about him. And I still think he's dangerous though, because I don't think one debate is going to change the fact that, as we've learned, Bloomberg has been spending not a lot, not on just this election, but he's been buying influence and building a network of influence for the last 15 years. He spent billions and billions of dollars. He's ramped it up in the last couple of years, but he's bought himself influence all around the country. And that is how he's been able to surge to second place. It's not just the fact that he's been buying ads everywhere. It's also because of the influence he's bought in state after state after state after state. And that's why he's so competitive. Granted, he's not taking away Sanders voters. It seems the voters he's gaining are from Joe Biden. So it's not like he poses a threat to Sanders in that respect. But what he does is, just as Sanders was starting to surge against all these other candidates they've been throwing at them, now they have a new person in the mix that centrists and moderates can coalesce behind, and that can basically ultimately prevent Sanders from getting enough delegates to meet the threshold to avoid a brokered convention. And we can talk more about that later, because I think that needs to be discussed more in depth. But I do think my point is that I think Bloomberg, I don't think people should just assume that because he had one bad debate, he's not going to be competitive, because he's bought so much influence. And on a basic level, I think most Americans, most average primary voters are not like you and me or people on Twitter. They don't follow the day-to-day. They don't even really follow the policy discussions. They just watch highlights from mainstream news. And if you're watching highlights from mainstream news, you don't even really know the substance about what's different between the candidates. And I'm going to tell you what I'm talking. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. I have some relatives who want to vote for Michael Bloomberg because he's a New Yorker like them. That's their answer is, oh, he's a New Yorker like me, and I like what he did in New York. They can't really name any policies. I mean, and some of these relatives are older, and they depend on things like Social Security and Medicare. And I'm like, but he wants to cut those things. They're like, no. He's a good guy. He's a New Yorker. He did great when he was mayor of New York. And it's that simple. For a lot of voters, that's what it's like. So that's why I think that despite all of this disgusting stuff that's come out about him, in the Democratic primary, he still may be competitive because people aren't like voting or even hearing about how awful Bloomberg is.
Yeah. I mean, I can throw out that I have those relatives too, and they've been made to believe that there's no way that Bernie Sanders could get elected because he's a Democratic socialist and he has that label. And so what you're seeing is people don't even have enthusiasm for Bloomberg in some cases, and they're just picking him because they believe he's a safe candidate. He's the one that they could just get behind. And they also believe that he's going to be able to look what you're saying. He's going to be able to unify the Democratic Party.
Right.
Now, for the time being, what we saw on the stage last night is that they're not going to give up their campaigns. Like Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren do not want to be told by this billionaire candidate that they need to get out of the race because, hey, your time is up and everyone's expected to align behind me. So that's one thing. And I suppose between you and I, we can talk about whether that just is like some ruse. Like, is that just what we're going to see happening out in front of us to make it seem like there was democracy for the final months of the primary? I don't know. But I don't actually believe that. I think that there is an offensive nature to Bloomberg's campaign because he is claiming to be able to save the day, and he's pushing Biden, Klobuchar, Warren, and Buttigieg aside. If you're part of those campaigns, you have to be offended by that.
Yeah, no, and I think the way he went about it definitely did offend them. And I think there's definitely some genuine hostility between Bloomberg and a lot of even the centrist Democrats for different reasons. That said, like, I do think a little bit of it is like theatrical performance here. And also, I'm the show's cynic. So I'm always like really cynical about how things are going to turn out. But I really genuinely believe that like a lot of people seem to want to shut their eyes to the fact that the Democratic Party is in fact willing to blow itself up if it means preventing a Sanders nomination. And what these people are doing is they're all staying in the race. Like in some ways, I kind of agree with Bloomberg that a lot of these people need to get out of the race, but for a different reason. They're staying in the race to keep Bernie Sanders from gaining enough delegates. If Elizabeth Warren, between Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden especially, a lot of Joe Biden's supporters say that the next candidate that they would support after Biden is Bernie Sanders. Okay, there's a certain amount of I don't know how many of Warren's supporters feel the same way, but I know it's a certain amount that would go to Bernie Sanders if she wasn't in the race. These people, no matter how poorly they're doing, are going to stay in the race till the end so that they can gain as many delegates as possible and deny them to Bernie Sanders. Because Bernie Sanders has to have, I think, like 50 or 51% of the overall delegates to prevent having to go to the second round where super delegates get to vote. Right. And that's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. And I think the reason I mention this is because a lot of people have been hesitant to talk about it, or they are really, in my opinion, naive and think that the Democratic Party wouldn't possibly hurt itself that way. They wouldn't possibly destroy their own party, because that's what would happen, right? People are like, the Democratic Party would destroy itself if it denied Bernie Sanders the nomination if he wins a plurality of delegates like he's going to. But I actually think that's really, really naive, because at the end of the day, like I've repeated over and over, Democratic elites would rather see a second Trump presidency than allow Bernie Sanders in the White House. Moreover, I think there's some delusion among Democratic elites about the fact that these people in the center can win. Just like they thought Hillary Clinton could win in 2016, they think some centrists can win in 2020, which I think they're completely wrong about. But as they've proven over and over again, they're idiots. So I think this is something to worry about. This is something that the Sanders supporters need to start talking about and taking more seriously.
Yeah. Electability, as Jonathan Cohn wrote for In These Times, is astrology for pundits. I mean, it's just your prejudice about certain candidates and how you think certain candidates are incapable of winning. And then it gets manifested when you're talking about positives for a candidate, that's your preference. That's like a way of you putting out your bias for a candidate without actually endorsing a candidate. That's how media pundits work. So when they're actually Bloomberg supporters, then they start talking about how electable Bloomberg is. But we shouldn't believe any of these electability arguments. And we have very clear examples because Joe Biden was the most electable candidate all of 2019. And look at where he is now. Like, you couldn't possibly believe a single pundit today if they told you Joe Biden is the one to beat Donald Trump. There's no way you'd laugh at them. You'd think they were ridiculous. And then now after last night, if they tell you Mike Bloomberg's the most electable, we have that debate performance, warts and all, where he's made to face his racism, his misogyny, his oligarch nature, and everything that makes him unelectable against Donald Trump. And I think you even saw it was in, just to mention the media coverage, and then we'll get to the superdelegates thing. It's fine. Sneezing is a normal thing.
No, I'm allergic to Bloomberg.
Yeah, that's why I say it's normal. I mean, the idea that a billionaire is trying to buy the nomination is causing me allergies too. They're just not flaring up right now. Mike Bloomberg is running. Sorry, I lost my complete train of thought because of the sneeze.
It was my sneeze. I'm so sorry.
It was Mike Bloomberg trying to buy the nomination. Chris Matthews after the debate.
He's still alive? Bernie didn't shoot him in Central Park yet?
Not yet. The bros are getting the guillotine. I hear, and they're going to come down to NBC News headquarters.
Come down to 30 Rock.
Wouldn't that be an amazing rally to have like a guillotine outside MSNBC's studio?
Just as like a theatrical kind of like a piece of art, just like as a warning to Chris Matthews.
But he said something to the effect where he got rolling and he was like, and we're going to get to this answer in just a minute, but the thing about superdelegates that came out at the end of the debate, he was responding to it, and he said basically all of those candidates are admitting that Bernie Sanders is going to win the most delegates during the primary, and that they're not going to win unless they take the nomination at the convention. And he said Bernie Sanders is the winner, and then he had to correct himself. Bernie Sanders is the winner so far, and then there's a DNC guy, Terry McAuliffe, who is a commentator on CNN.
Who's received a lot of money from Bloomberg, by the way. He's been a huge beneficiary of Bloomberg funding. Anyways, continue.
But he said Bernie Sanders was the clear front runner after the debate. The debate made Bernie Sanders look really, really good. So that doesn't bode well for Bloomberg. And as you're saying, if somebody's taking money from Bloomberg, if anybody taking money from Bloomberg is saying, that was a horrible, shitty performance. Like that's where we're at. So right here, we're going to play the clip at the end where Chuck Todd actually asked a good question to end the debate instead of something like, what's your most inspirational hero when you were a child, or what's your favorite thing to eat when you go travel to Europe, or some other stupid question he could have asked presidential candidates that nobody would have been able to figure out why that matters.
What's your favorite toenail polish color?
Well, he likes to ask I figured he was going to ask something like, so you have a crisis when you become president.
Who do you call?
Yeah. Or at 3 a.m. Where do you make the 3 a.m. phone call? But also you have to give up your favorite policy. Can you give up Medicare for all, Bernie?
You have to give up your fans. Such a Chuck Todd question. Yeah. You have to kill a baby. Which one do you kill?
So here's the clip.
We are less than 2 weeks away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention to clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this
that
yes or no
everybody else,
fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
The most votes should become the nominee.
5 no's and a yes.
We are not done yet. We're back with more from...
All right. So what you saw in the clip is that Bernie Sanders is the only person who is saying that he would support democracy at the Democratic National Convention. He's the only person in that clip where he mentions that superdelegates are going to be involved in this process. Each of those candidates said, let the process work. And what they're saying is, let the superdelegates be able to vote against the will of the people.
Yep. And it's incredibly anti-democratic. I mean, some might even call that a bit authoritarian. And for a bunch of people who run around talking about the, importance of democracy and constantly justifying U.S. intervention in other countries because they're anti-democratic. I mean, could these people be any bigger hypocrites than this? Like, if this was happening in any other country, well, not any other country, a country that's an adversary country, these same politicians would be losing their shit. And here they're basically saying that the will of the voters of the Democratic Party doesn't matter. And the thing is that the rules are rigged against Sanders in this case. They are stacked against him. And this is a real possibility that this could happen. People need to take it seriously, because I continue to see the argument being made that, oh no, if they do that, like, they'll destroy the party. They would never do that. They'll guarantee a second Trump win. They wouldn't do that. Or, we're all going to travel to the convention and protest and it'll be a riot. And it's like, yo, in 2016, I was there. I was reporting for Shadow Proof from the DNC. And there were protests. Inside the DNC, there was walkouts by Bernie Sanders supporters, and they went to a different part of the convention area and protested both inside and outside. It didn't make a difference. It didn't make a difference at all. And I'm not trying to say this to so that I say people, it's not worth it. This is all stupid. I'm saying people need to be on top of this and decide, what are we going to do when this happens? Because it's not if, it's when it happens. This party is run by people who don't give a shit. All they care about is keeping themselves in power. And if that means blowing up their own party and alienating Sanders supporters, they'll do it, because they did it in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely. And just again, to put an emphasis on what Bloomberg is saying, because he's the one who we're all looking at to steal this nomination. And in fact, anything that you say about Bloomberg needs to be prefaced with, the only reason this campaign exists is to stop Bernie Sanders. I keep seeing people talk about Bloomberg versus Trump in a way that ignores the fact that he exists in this 2020 campaign because of Bernie Sanders. It's not normal for a candidate to enter, at least in this modern era, so late. It's not normal to come and start campaigning in October and then suddenly build up you don't have a ground game in states. And then you write off the first 4 states, which, can you imagine Bernie Sanders saying, I'm not going to play in the first 4 states? People would be up and
they would write him off. They'd be like, you're absurd. You're ridiculous. This is not how it works.
You hate black people. You hate Latinos. You don't like farmers, and you don't like the white rural people out.
Is Bloomberg's going to be a part of Nevada, right?
He's not on the ballot.
So they won't even be caucusing for this. Is crazy. This is insane. And the guy he bought that his way to rule changes to allow himself into this election. Yeah.
He gave money to the DNC, to be clear, over $300,000 to the DNC, but he gave $800,000 to a grassroots victory fund. And then that money was handled by the fundraising committee and divided up and sent to 44 state party committees. So 44 states have received the maximum contribution that you can give to a party committee if you're an individual. And so he's maxed out. He can't give more legally unless he gives it to super PACs or something. And
crazy.
And then they're going to know that. They're going to know they have $8,000 to $10,000 from him that they can use for their own. I mean, that's pretty good money for a local committee to have to use. So So I just want to really call attention to this. He said, whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do, then everybody can. And then Chuck Todd said, so you want the convention to work its will? And he said, yes. And then when he said that, I want to point out, it's actually Elizabeth Warren who bails him out, because she makes that into a specific thing that people can repeat. So she says, but a convention working its will means the people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention, which is a little misleading. Nobody's suggesting that those people should no longer be attached to those candidates. But she's jumping on board with the idea that all those pledged delegates come to the convention, and then after the first ballot, you can defy who has the plurality of pledged delegates. So,
and let's be clear here about Elizabeth Warren's role, because she has no path to victory. There's no scenario in which she wins, and she knows it. The only reason for her to stay in the race at this point is to deny Bernie Sanders more support. That is the only reason I can fathom. And she's been attacking him. She's been undermining him. I know this is a little bit off topic, but with Elizabeth Warren, one thing that didn't get talked about at all during this debate was foreign policy, except for some talk about Amy Klobuchar for not knowing the name of the Mexican president. But yeah, no, foreign policy was completely absent from this debate. Now, there was a couple things about China, but other than that, we didn't hear anything. And it just goes to show how unimportant it seems to the Democratic Party. But also there are, people like to talk about there's not huge differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders domestically. I don't agree with that. I think there's big differences, but I think there's even bigger differences between them on foreign policy. There's a really good article by Alex Rubinstein at The Gray Zone that goes through each and every single person that is on the foreign policy advisory team for Elizabeth Warren. And it is a parade of hawks and interventionists and regime changers and people from all of these think tanks that are funded by the weapons industry and funded by different governments, like the Gulf governments and the US government, who have been a part of the Obama administration, a part of the Clinton administration, and have been pushing for these awful destructive policies that Elizabeth Warren claims she's trying to change. And there was also a recent article by David Cleon, I think that's how you say his name, in The Nation, supposedly outlining Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy, but he actually didn't go into substance at all. He just called it progressive and didn't give us any information. And then he actually attacked the Gray Zone on Twitter because Aaron Mate was trying to ask him why there was no substance in his article. But my point is there is an effort by people, by certain people, to whitewash and to sort of distort the sort of foreign policy agenda that Elizabeth Warren has. It is not progressive in the least. It might not be as hawkish as Hillary Clinton, but it's still really, really bad. And I think it's really a disservice to everyone who's watching for foreign policy not to be on the agenda. And it's sad that someone like Tulsi Gabbard is no longer able to be in the race. They're letting Bloomberg in the race, but not her to be on the debate stage, because she's the only person who's running on a platform that's solely, built around the issue of foreign policy, which no one else is talking about. But my point is Bernie Sanders, while he's not perfect, and there's certainly things that I criticize him for when it comes to foreign policy, as far as people who have a chance of winning go, Bernie Sanders is the most progressive, no questions asked, the most, the least likely to start any wars, and the least likely to be overthrowing governments. Elizabeth Warren is not like that. And those are big differences that should be discussed, but they're not being discussed because sadly, not just in the mainstream media, but sadly on, when it comes to the progressive movement in the US, always, foreign policy is just on the back burner. It's not important, even though our foreign policy totally impacts our domestic policy.
Yeah. And I put up the banner, and just to quickly mention that Pete said this thing about he said this thing about wanting to use hard tools. He used the words hard tools.
What does that mean?
Against China around climate change, which is sort of really frightening. I mean, I don't want to know. They call him CIA Pete, right? I don't want to know what he's talking about with the people he has who he remembers working with when he was deployed to Afghanistan. Of course, he was part of that intelligence squad that was involved in disrupting the financial operations of Al-Qaeda. and other extremist groups in Afghanistan is what they supposedly were supposed to be doing. And he's talking about using militarism to go after China because they're not strong enough on climate change. And then oddly enough, it's actually Bloomberg who counters and says, well, China's been doing some good steps. It's in fact India that we should be concerned about because they're letting their emissions get really bad and out of control.
These are also countries of like over 1 billion people. Like
yeah, it's true.
They act like these are tiny little countries that are like fucking up the rest of the world. Like the country that
doesn't compare to us.
Not even a little bit. I mean, per capita, like the US has 1/3 of the people of China. And I think like per capita, we have a higher rate of like producing trash and greenhouse emissions and all the things that cause environmental destruction. But yeah, it was interesting to see that Bloomberg, who's a huge hawk, was actually more moderate and like calm about China than Pete. And I noticed when Pete was talking about China and he said hard tools, like Chuck Todd or one of the moderators started to cut him off. And I was like, no, let this motherfucker talk. I want to hear what he means by hard tools. Because I wanted to hear where he was going with that. It sounded like he was saying that we should pressure China with military force.
Yeah, because he's pretty militarist. I mean, he's the one who wants to declare that the drug cartels in Mexico are terrorist organizations.
Yeah, that's insane. And I was like, that's why it was funny to see. So I think Pete is a smug rat. And Russia didn't tell me to say that. I'm saying that from like, it's like my opinion. I think he's a smug rat and I'm a woman of color saying that. Okay. I'm a woman of color, birdie bro. But he's a smug tool rat. He's like such a piece of shit. And he's just like a suck up sleazeball who was created in like some consultancy firm, CIA laboratory. Anyways, and like just watching him like talk about these things, it's so disgusting. Like, I think he's worse than Joe Biden. Like, I think he's more hawkish than Joe Biden. Like, you want to declare the drug cartels terrorists? Do you know what that would mean? That would mean we'd have to send like the military. The U.S. military would have to go to like Mexico.
He's to the right of Amy Klobuchar on that, by the way. She's the one that called him. Nobody else on that stage called him out. I mean, she had an interest in making that something because she was embarrassed she couldn't remember the name of the Mexico president.
Which is pretty fucking pathetic, by the way.
It is awful. I mean, she tried to spin that very desperately.
You don't know the fucking leader of our neighboring countries. Like, it wasn't like they were asking her who the leader of some obscure country or a country that's like really far away is. It was literally the neighbor, like our southern fucking neighbor. You don't know the fucking leader of their country. Also, let's be clear here. Nobody would ever forget that Justin Trudeau is in charge of Canada.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody would ever forget that. But Mexico, it's like, it's some leftist, like a sort of leftist president, like that we don't really like. So who cares?
Okay, so.
And then it was real quick. It was also really funny when Amy was trying to defend herself. I feel kind of bad for her sometimes because she is her authentic self. And like, she's not pretending to be something she's not. And when she was defending herself, she started listing off the leaders she does know. Like, she was like, you know, and I'll tell you the leader of Honduras, you know who it is? I was just like, oh, poor Amy.
I know that Mohammed bin Salman is running Saudi Arabia. And
it's kind of like what she did, and then you just couldn't help but feel kind of like bad for her because she was actually like beneficial to Bernie Sanders in the last debate because she was going after his greatest enemies. And about Pete Buttigieg, one of the most slimiest remarks, there was two really slimy remarks from him. There was the one about the Bernie supporters, and he like said some empty bullshit. He was like, well, this shows, you know, if your supporters are going to act like this, then you know, it shows that you can't like be a good leader or something. He like said some stupid consultancy firm focused group crap about that was annoying. And then he went on to, what was it about? It was so obnoxious. It was about healthcare. It was about healthcare.
So this is where I wanted to. I did a report on this, and I just wanted to cut in and talk about this a little bit, just so we're clear. And maybe people who listen to this show are aware of the details. People who follow us are aware that this is completely concocted in the media. But I just wanted to map this out because this is what. So how many unions does Pete Buttigieg have that have endorsed him? I think the number is 0. I think he's got 0 unions, and he's been spending the last 1 to 2 weeks acting like he's the savior of unions, like he knows what's best for unions, and he's just sucking up to union leadership. It's amazing the lengths that this chipmunk will go to suck up to. That he'll go to suck up to anyone who runs anything. It's just amazing. And so
he's a brown noser. He's like that annoying kid in class who raises their hand when there was no question asked. He just wants to be like, I already knew that.
Yeah, but actually he's the one when the teacher comes back from using the bathroom that says, John wasn't sitting in his seat the whole time. You need to tell John he needs to sit in his seat. And it's just like, fuck you. And so this whole thing with the Culinary Workers Union comes from the leadership. Let's be very clear. Before they put out this union scorecard that suggested that Bernie would end culinary healthcare, which is basically fear-mongering, it's saying that he's going to take away the union's healthcare, and then also said that they would require Medicare for all. So that's right-wing rhetoric saying that he's going to force people into government health programs. And it's using that language of like, oh, you know, sort of like hearkening back to Stalinist Russia and being like, you're going to get forced into a government program. They had this flyer that
force you into a government gulag.
I don't know if you know this. They had this flyer that suggested that first Trump was a problem, but then they mentioned Bernie Sanders along with Trump in this flyer.
It was really dirty.
And they didn't separate it out. It was like equally him, and they kind of mentioned Elizabeth Warren, but just because of how she's been behaving the last month, I'm not going to defend her. So I'll just be like, ignore that they were coming after her. But she's been lumped into this too, but in a weird way, because she's a terribly wishy-washy position on Medicare for all right now. It's even harder to pin down than Mayor Pete's because it's just all over the place. And so they put this out, and then John Ralston is this hack who runs this nonprofit media organization called the Nevada Independent that he founded in 2017. And John Ralston, you will all know because he is responsible for the fake news around the chair throwing at the Nevada Democratic Party convention in 2016. And it's universally recognized that that never happened, but he made everyone believe. Yeah, he made it. And also he lied about Bernie Sanders supporters impersonating culinary workers unions in order to gain access to the workplaces where they wanted to canvass and try to mobilize support ahead of the caucuses in 2016. And they were wearing culinary workers pins in solidarity along with like hats and Bernie t-shirts. And he said they were masquerading. And
I remember this.
And then he made Gioconda, the woman, the secretary treasurer who's been going off on Bernie Sanders and has the position on the Center for American Progress's board. So she's kind of looped into this whole like Clinton Democrat universe. And this all went around and it made it seem like Bernie Sanders people were like committing some mortal sin against like unforgivable sin against the culinary workers. And the thing that I'll end here is that the Nevada Independent is getting close to $1 million from MGM Resorts International, which owns the Mirage, where Culinary Workers Union have workers. They've got other people who are funding them. The Nevada Independent does, like Boyd Gaming and Caesars. And all of these companies that I'm naming are trustees on the Culinary Health Fund, are involved in managing the Culinary Health Fund that manages the union's healthcare. They have their own contracts that are looped into the for-profit healthcare system. And most crucially, these people who are executives at the casino and gaming companies are not the only industry in Nevada that feel this way, but they absolutely do not want bargaining to stray from healthcare. They don't want, and Bernie has repeated this multiple times, he's been very clear, they don't want workplace negotiations to go into, we want a better pension, we want raises, we would like you to change this.
Because if you don't have to spend so much time on healthcare, you can spend time on all the other things to negotiate over. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it's like it behooves the bosses to.
Yeah. So, and then right here at this point, I'm going to play the clip of Bernie in December speaking to the town hall, and people can see, put this to rest. There is no problem among the rank and file workers with Bernie Sanders. They like Bernie Sanders. He got a lot of applause and cheers for speaking honestly about Medicare for all, and he confronted the question of what would happen to their union healthcare plan, and they appreciated his answer. He was forthright and honest about what would happen. And I should say, in his Medicare for all plan, which has transition elements to it, there's a transition plan for handling unions so that they're not just left out in the wilderness as you move to Medicare for all. So right here, we'll play that.
Listen to this. This is what we are doing. We are proposing. Number one, we're going to expand Medicare to cover dental care. Because dental care is health care. We're going to make sure that everybody in America who needs it has hearing aids, has eyeglasses. And the other thing that we are going to do is have Medicare cover home health care so that elderly people are not pushed out of their homes into nursing homes. We are going to a Medicare for all because we're going to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and lower drug prices significantly. Nobody will pay more than $200 a year for prescription drugs, no matter what your illness is. Under Medicare for all, people will be able to go to any doctor they want, go to any hospital that they want. Now, let me deal with the issue that's on your mind. Because we spend so much for healthcare, your employer is spending a lot on your healthcare. On the Medicare for all, because we end the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies who made $100 billion last year, because we end the bureaucratic nightmare of thousands of separate health programs that have to be administered, we save many, many hundreds of billions of dollars. And that means that your employer will not have to pay $15,000 a year for your health care. Your employer will pay $3,000. That's a $12,000 differential. You know who gets that $12,000? You get that $12,000. So in other words, what we are proposing is comprehensive health care. The most broad health care program ever brought forward in the United States of America. We save money for everybody because we end the profiteering and greed and collusion of the drug companies and the insurance companies. Employers save money. Under our legislation, workers get the difference. If your employer is now paying you, is spending $15,000 a year, which he is on your health insurance, under our plan, roughly speaking, he'll be spending $3,000. $12,000 differential, which goes to your wages and other benefits. I think that's a good deal.
I believe in town hall meetings, but we're going to let candidates speak without any sort of heckling. And if you want to heckle, go outside and heckle. I don't mind. We want to learn. The town hall meetings are to learn from each candidate. Frankly, not to learn from the hecklers, but to learn from the candidates. Second, I want to be very clear to everybody. This union stands very strongly that every single American, just like Senator Sanders has said, deserves to have good quality health care. It is a right. It should never be a privilege in this country.
Okay, so there's only a few other issues to talk about before we conclude. I don't want to let Bloomberg off the hook. I think one of the worst moments of the debate was when he got confronted over stop and frisk, deservedly so. He deserved to be kicked very hard for that. I think this is another point where we can play a clip, but before we do, what you're hearing is he talks about how like he's just there, and then all of a sudden stop and frisk gets out of control. And that language is really telling, especially since when he put out the statement supposedly apologizing for the stop and frisk clip that was going around, that Benjamin Dixon at Progressive Army made popular, that he went and found that everyone was sharing. He then says that he inherited stop and frisk. That's a total fucking lie to say that you inherited stop and frisk. In fact, there's an amazing quote where Rudy Giuliani says that it was Bloomberg that was more racist with stop and frisk because he expanded stop and frisk. He claims that he was keeping stop and frisks under like 100,000 people a year, whereas like Bloomberg made it go up exponentially.
It was like 800,000 or something crazy like that. Or something
in a span of 3 years, it went to over 500,000 people a year were being stopped. And then I think in total, as Joe Biden put it, Mike Bloomberg was throwing 5 million like black people up against the wall.
Crazy. No, it's insane. And like his apology wasn't even an apology. It was just like I didn't know that was going to be the outcome. And it was great the way he was attacked, because the attack was coming from everybody. And they all made really good points. It's like, well, you only stopped doing it, or you only lessened it because you were forced to. And his apology was so inauthentic. Like he can't even lie well. Like what kind of politician are you? You can't lie well.
So we'll put it right here.
Mayor Bloomberg, at the beginning of this debate, you took some incoming fire on this next topic, so let's get into it. In 2015, this is how you describe your policing policy as mayor. Quote, we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods, and you explain that as, quote, because that's where all the crime is. You went on to say, and the way you should get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them. You've apologized for that policy, but what does that kind of language say about how you view people of color or people in minority neighborhoods?
Well, if I go back and look at my time in office, the one thing that I'm really worried about, embarrassed about, was how it turned out with stop and frisk. When I got into office, there were 650 murders a year in New York City. And I thought that my first responsibility was to give people the right to live. That's the basic right of everything. And we adopted a policy which had been in place, the policy that all big police departments use of stop and frisk. What happened, however, was it got out of control. And when I discovered that we were doing too many stop and frisks, we cut 95% of it out. And I've sat down with a bunch of African-American clergy and business people to talk about this, to try to learn. I've talked to a number of kids who'd been stopped. And I was trying to understand how we change our policies so we can keep the city safe, because the crime rate did go from 650, 50% down to 300. And we have to keep the lid on crime, but we cannot go out and stop people indiscriminately.
Mayor, thank you. Let me go to Vice President Biden on this.
Okay. And I think now's a good time for any final thoughts that we have. We're headed into the Nevada Caucuses, which are going to happen on February 22nd. Then we've got South Carolina. We've got Super Tuesday, which by the time, and this was another thing. The thing about the tax returns actually does matter to me, not because I care about the content of the tax returns, but I think it's important to make this point that when he's saying he would release his tax returns, he is suggesting he would put it out in like the middle of March. Rania, more than half of the country will have already voted in the Democratic primary.
That's such a bullshit way to get out of.
So, for all of this, and by the way, I wholeheartedly stand with Brianna Joy Gray, who said it was birtherism to go after Bernie Sanders on the medical records. He's totally put out his own documentation and the letters are good enough. And he even had Dr. Sanjay Gupta, celebrity doctor of CNN, saying that that letter is legitimately enough for Bernie Sanders to convince people that he's healthy.
Yeah, and you know what was crazy was like Pete Buttigieg was going after him for this, and he was like, I think Bernie Sanders should get a physical and show us the results. I'll do it too. And I was like, wait, motherfucker, you haven't even done it?
Also, you're 39, so nobody's questioning your health. I mean, it's just a fake issue. I mean, I'm to the point, the two things I'll say are, I'm to the point where Bernie's the front runner, and there are certain things we need to see and just acknowledge that they don't really merit a response. Like they're coming because they want us to be distracted and they want us to engage. And so whether we're talking like the Bernie Bros stuff, when they whip that up, what they're doing is they're trying to divert us from focusing on Michael Bloomberg as an oligarch, from looking at like the policies of Mike Bloomberg, or doing the organizing that is being effective. I mean, why did the Culinary Workers leadership, along with the Nevada Independent, attack Bernie Sanders in Nevada in the way that they did to try to drive a wedge? His Latino support is incredible. It's phenomenal. He's getting close to 50% of Latino support, even with all the other candidates in the race. And they are trying to drive a wedge between him and this huge support that he's gaining. So we just have to be aware of what they're doing. That's what I'd say to people. Just be aware of what they're doing. And some things out there do deserve a response. Immediately, also, you have to respond.
Exactly. I guess the last thing I would leave people with, again, I'm the cynic of the show. So I think after what happened in Iowa, I think New Hampshire, like Bernie Sanders got totally screwed. Like in New Hampshire, he won, but he also got the same number of delegates as Pete. There's apparently a disaster looming in Nevada with the replacement iPad Google Doc structure they're using to replace the app that failed in Iowa. And people who are working at the precincts are already very confused and are saying it's going to be a disaster. I think this is intentional chaos. My point is just we can't keep letting it slide. I think everybody kind of let Iowa slide, but all these little ways of trying to steal from Bernie Sanders are going to continue. And we have to start having a bigger conversation about what we're going to do when they ultimately take it from him. That's what I want to leave people with.
On that, though, the thing with Nevada is that they developed the system of transparency, supposedly, so that we could see who was voting first. So you remember, for Iowa, we know that there were 6,000 more votes that Bernie Sanders had than Pete Buttigieg. And that's supposed to be good. But it's sort of like the Democratic Party didn't figure out what they're going to do with these early voting people who are going, and they're not participating in the caucuses. And did you hear, Rania, that, this is going to be old news when people start to listen to it on Sunday after the caucuses, but it still should be remembered historically that the party was contacting the presidential campaigns, telling them that there are people that voted for them and their ballots were not legit. And it's up to the campaign to contact these voters and tell them that they should come to the caucus and participate. That is messed up. No, the Democratic Party and the people running the elections are the one that need to verify the ballots. They're, objectively speaking, whether you're a Sanders supporter or not, Warren supporter, you still vote Tulsi, you're Yang Gang, you're not going to vote for Democrats at all. When you vote, the Board of Elections is the one that manages your ballot. It's not up to a presidential campaign to, and the other thing I'll throw out there, I think what we're talking about is really crucial about how people need to pay attention to what is being done. The Nevada State Democratic Party chair is William McCurdy, and he has a position on the credentials committee for the DNC's national convention in Milwaukee, just so people can be clear. So whatever he does, how he performs, if he does it well, he's already been promised a prestigious position on the committee in the 2020 convention, whatever he does to monitor how this all unfolds. But they don't know how to consider the early votes in the caucuses. And the thing is that, like, if you're Joe Biden, I think this is important for people to understand. If you're Joe Biden, for example, and you only have 15 people show up to a caucus site, and you're told that you have to have 20 to go to the next level, well, then you might get early votes that come in and make you a viable candidate. But what we're hearing is that they actually don't, there's not a formal process that's been worked out to make sure that those votes get to the right location. So it's going to screw everything. You see what I'm saying? It screws everything up.
Sounds like a really disgustingly complicated process that shouldn't be so complicated. And I don't know how we can call ourselves a big democracy when it's this fucking difficult to vote.
Yeah, and you wonder why, like, most Black Americans will just stay home and not even participate because they know that they're just going to have their votes suppressed, and like, why even fight? Like, they're the ones that, like, who have the legacy of just staying home. And so I'll end with this really real thing, and I mean it. I mean it. I'm putting this out there. I bet you'll probably co-sign this. I've been hearing from Michael Moore this incredible statistic that there was a movement in Michigan during 2016 that nobody organized. It just happened. Nearly 90,000 people went to vote, and when they voted for president and Hillary Clinton was the one that they had as the option against Donald Trump, they left the presidential box blank. They voted for all the Democratic candidates down, but nearly 90,000 people did not vote for Trump or Clinton. Some of them maybe voted for a few Republicans.
I'm sure it was probably Russia. It was probably Russia's fault.
That's how many people didn't pick either of the two. They said, I don't want any of the there's no lesser of two evils for me. In Flint, Michigan, 8,000 people decided not to vote.
Wow.
And there were people who had voted previously for, like, Obama. So just be clear here on what's happening. And this is also the clarity that I've taken with me. I've had the fortune to be able to do Reverend Jesse Jackson's show here in Chicago for a couple of the past weeks. And this is the clarity that I have and why I'm willing to stand up to anybody who tells me that I have to vote blue no matter who.
Sorry, I keep yawning, by the way. It's because it's late here.
It's because we've been droning on and I need to wrap.
No, because we record in the morning your time and the night my time. Anyways.
Yeah, I'm fresh and Rania's been.
I'm like, my day's over.
Get this over with so I can go find a show to sit down and binge. No, but the legacy here is that all of these people in the country who are minorities have had to live through Jim Crow. They've had to live through slavery. And what I was hearing articulated while I was on this radio show, that's a very well-respected Black radio program, is that, like, they don't need to sell out. They don't need to vote for someone just because they're told that they have to beat Donald Trump. In fact, they say 4 more years of Donald Trump, we could survive that. We've survived Jim Crow. We survived slavery. What's 4 more years of Donald Trump? We're going to make it. We've made it this, like, if you think of what people who have been oppressed in this country have made it through, 4 more years is the least of their concerns of living under Donald Trump. And the chance, and what matters most is, like, the opportunity to actually vote for something for the first time. Like, you're seeing that coalition. That's the big thing. Like, if you think of every single cycle in our lifetime, that I've been politically aware, going back to George W. Bush, from what I can remember, it's always been anybody but that Republican. Like, every Democrat. Okay, Obama had a positive image built around him, and you were voting for something. But outside of that, it's like, okay, 2012 it was, we already had 4 years of him. So again, like, we're back to anybody but a Republican. So it's now you have this rare opportunity where you actually see people can vote for a vision, and they might be able to change something. And you're not going to get people to go vote if you're just telling them anybody but this person.
Not just that, you're also, like, so many people are inspired by Bernie Sanders and the movement he's built and the ideology he's promoting, that if they steal it from him, they're going to be denying themselves a huge base that literally will not support Democrats anymore. They won't support anybody. It's going to turn people off from politics, is what's going to happen. And maybe that's what they want. I don't know. But we'll have to wait and see.
So as we end, are you willing to say that no matter what, the Democratic National Committee or the Democratic Party is dead at this moment? Because I am. I'm willing to say, I'm willing to say that if Bernie Sanders wins, he's going to blow up the Democratic National Committee and all of the consultant class and everyone around it. And it's basically just dead. It no longer exists in the way that we've come to understand it. But if they deprive Bernie Sanders of the nomination, then they're also signing their own death notice.
I don't think so. I disagree with that. I mean, I think that's like, I think that's like a really optimistic.
You don't think people are fed up and totally tired? And
I think people are fed up and tired, but I don't think they have the power that we think they do. If they steal it from Bernie Sanders, they'll be denying themselves people in the Democratic Party, but they'll still be in charge of it. That's not going to change. Like, why would that change? What did it change in 2016? No.
That's fair. All right. Well,
we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong and cynical, but we'll see.
No. The reason why I put out that argument is because I do think that when you can see who's being selected for these convention committees, when you can see so clearly how they're letting Bloomberg buy the nomination, when you can see that money has so co-opted this party, and then like the Republicans they're basically becoming the Republican Party. They're making a full transformation into being a second Republican Party and ending that morphosis. And so it's like, once that is the case, that voters
it could be opening the door to a big third party, but I don't know. Still too early to tell.
Yeah, it's hard, and I'm eager for Super Tuesday so that like I can actually talk about this with more clarity, because I think there's a lot that you can't say until you know what half the country has voted for, and then you can actually see where Bernie Sanders is with all of those pledged delegates, so that you know where we're at. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll be back again soon. But in the meantime, since this is the first time that people are going to be coming to our video on YouTube, you can find us at patreon.com/unauthorized disclosure. And if you go there and become a patron, you can support future broadcasts like this. I imagine that if we're going to be doing this, we'll probably be doing them mostly for patrons going forward as like a perk. But maybe we might have more free ones like these built around debates and other things. But I imagine this is going to be a really good perk to offer our patrons. So if you want to have access to episodes like this where we're on video, or also want to be able to get access to exclusive content, become a patron at Unauthorized Disclosure today. And that does it. So we'll be back again next week with another episode.